Hello, folks. So now we're going to dig into the theory of how these medieval monks put the psalm and the antiphon together, and we're going to use this as a way to kind of get at medieval theory in general, the church modes. So for a quick reminder, we talked about the antiphon before. That's this bit up to Genuite, which we sing first. Then we sing the psalm. We got our little intonation there, reciting tone here, mediant here, reciting tone here, it's an A, and then termination. And then this, after they sing all the verses, over here, these are all the psalm verses. Then this down here is the lesser doxology. Forgive my handwriting. With this, Seculorum Amen, and the vowels in there. And that's what these vowels are here. This is called the Avove. And this is how they end singing the psalm. And then this leads back around up unto the antiphon. Okay, so what we noticed is the reciting tone down here. This is an A. And the final is a D. Okay, and these are a fifth apart. So medieval theorists used some of what I talked about on Tuesday. Of what the ancient Greeks did, filling in their perfect consonances. I talked about the ancient Greeks filling in, the fourths and the fifths, etc. And that's what the medieval scholars did. And so what you're seeing now is when you fill in a fifth descending, right, there's only 4 different places where you can put the half step. Put the half step at the bottom, second, third from the bottom, at the top, and the one that we just saw started on A and went down a whole step, and then to G, and then a whole step to F, and then a half step to E, and then a whole step to D. So it was this one over here with this particular pattern. But they used all 4 of these patterns, right? And if you lay these on top of the diatonic pitch set, that collection of whole steps and half steps that the Greeks used and that I talked about on Tuesday, you get 4 possible little modes that end on, this one ends on D, and this note up here is A. This one ends on E, and this note up here is B. This one ends on F, and this one up here is C, and this one ends on G, and the top note would be D. So you get these 4 modes with this mode has, the first mode has D as a final, A as a reciting tone, E as a final, F as a final, G as a final. Now, just a little quirk in here, which is that for this one, and this one, the top note is the reciting tone, right? For this one, they didn't like reciting on the bottom note of a half-step pair. So the reciting tone would actually be another note up here. The reciting tone would actually be C. And they gave these Greek names the same way that the ancient Greeks had done. So the one with D in the bottom is Dorian. The one with E on the bottom is Phrygian. The one with F on the bottom is Lydian. And the one with G on the bottom is Mixolydian. Now, the way, you notice we only have 5 notes here. The way they completed the octave was to add another 4 notes. These are pentachords, and they would add 4 notes called a tetrachord, a filled-in perfect fourth. And they could add them they were conjunct tetrachords, so they shared a note. They could add them above or below. So, for Dorian mode, for example, they could have the pentachord that goes from D up to A, and then starting on A, they'd add 4 more notes on top, and that would get us this. This is mode 1. Whoa. With this, come on, Apple Pencil. Work. Apologies, everybody. Oh, there we go. That's our final. Here's our reciting tone. Here's the original pentachord. And here's the tetrachord they added on top to complete it. For Phrygian, here's our final. Remember, the reciting tone would be here, but they didn't like singing on the bottom of a half-step pair, so the reciting tone was here. Here's our original pentachord, and here's the tetrachord they added to complete it. For Lydian, here's our final. Here's our reciting tone. This is the original pentachord. That's the added tetrachord. And then finally for Mixolydian, final, reciting tone, pentachord, tetrachord. Now, if you've been paying attention to the file names, you'll notice these are all called authentic, and that's because when they added notes to the top of the pentachord, they called them authentic. They also could complete the octave by adding notes below the pentachord, and these were called plagal, which again you can see in the file name. So the final stage, this is plagal Dorian, or mode 2. So the final stays the same. Here's the original pentachord, and here's the tetrachord that they added in below. And one of the things about plagal is that you move the reciting tone you take the reciting tone from the authentic mode and you move it down a third. So the reciting tone in the authentic mode was A, but nope, it's now this. This is our reciting tone, F. And the same thing with Phrygian, right? Here's our final. Here's the original pentachord. Here's the tetrachord that they added. And if you remember in Phrygian, the reciting tone wasn't B, it was C, because they didn't like reciting on the lower note of a half-step pair. And so we move it down a third, and we end up with A as our reciting tone in plagal Phrygian. And then for Lydian, plagal Lydian, here's our final. Here's the original pentachord. Here's the tetrachord. Reciting tone was C over here, this guy, but nope, not anymore. Reciting tone is now A. And then for plagal Mixolydian, this also has a little bit of a weird aspect to it. Here's our final. Here's the original pentachord. Here's the added tetrachord. And then if you remember, the reciting tone was D in the authentic version. If we moved it down a third, we'd wind up on B, and they don't like singing on B. So the reciting tone here is C. These all... So for the naming, you saw the names, but I'll just sum it all up here. They gave those original pentachords 4 Greek names: Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Hypomixolydian. And I was talking about authentic Dorian and plagal Dorian, and each one having their authentic and plagal version. They also would call the authentic Dorian, they would just call Dorian, and the plagal version they would call Hypodorian, Hypo. Hypodorian, hypo meaning like below, like hypothermia or a hypodermic needle that goes beneath your skin. So you got Dorian, Hypodorian, Phrygian, Hypophrygian, Lydian, Hypolydian, Mixolydian, Hypomixolydian, which is a mouthful. So they also gave them numbers. Dorian was mode 1, Hypodorian was mode 2. Phrygian mode 3, Hypophrygian mode 4, Lydian 5, Hypolydian 6, Mixolydian 7, Hypomixolydian 8. And if you remember going back when there were 8 psalm tones, each one of those tones conforms to one of those modes. And I mentioned there was a kind of bonus one. It's called the wandering tone. And it actually started in a different and ended in different places. So don't worry about that one. But that's how the modes work. And then the last thing about the modes is that each mode had its quirks. And this came from kind of adapting the existing modes into the new system, right? So chants in mode 1, which is Dorian or authentic Dorian, they often didn't just go from D to D. Let's go back and take a peek at him. So it looks like the range is D to D, but typically you would also have the C below the D in there. Yeah. That was just a typical part of singing in mode 1, and that actually had a name, the subtonium modi. Kind of the note below. They also had another sort of quirk that I'll come back to and talk about in a second, but when you had 2 A's in a row, but with a B between them, so something like this, ignore the mode for a second. If you had this, 2 A's here with a B in between, they would lower that B a half step. Instead of the whole step like you usually see in the mode. Another quirk of modes was in Lydian. So you can see they didn't like this interval here from the final to here is a tritone, and they did not like that. They didn't like having a tritone against the final. This is the only key where that happens, and so they would adjust that B down. To avoid that harshness. And so they had to come up with some new symbols. They actually got this from the Greeks. The Greeks had a regular B and a kind of lowered version of the B, but the medieval theorists kind of based it on what they called it. And so for the hard B, the unlowered B, they used this kind of symbol, right? It's like a very square B. And then for the lowered B, they used this kind of symbol. They called this, they called this one the hard B, and they called this one the soft B. And you can actually see the hard B is like, 3/4 of the way to a natural sign and about halfway to a sharp sign. So that hard B is actually kind of the ancestor of our natural and sharp sign, and the soft B obviously looks like a flat, right? So they would just write that soft B, and that meant the lowered B. Okay, so that's it for the church modes. I'm going to end this video here, and the next video will start with what happened when some clever folks kind of got their hands on the church modes and started coming up with some efficient ways to teach those to students.